Harun has got a lot of experience in terms of activism, and especially in the last 1.5 years, I've been working with him on THP platform, and he will look into a very comprehensive way of as an activist and into countering hate and extremism, and his experience in this field lately. So, Dr. Harun Qasim. Dr. Harun, you are muted. Sorry.
Sorry. No, thank you, Jasam. I will not really reintroduce myself. You've done a great job. Thank you for your kind words. So what I might do is today, we will just go through the following agenda. We'll start with unlike Prof. Barton, what we've learned is we've learned in our own through our own life experiences. And so a lot of this talk is about our life experiences and what we learned from the work of people like, Greg Barton and people like Rita Jabri and, Adil Khan, and how we are trying to use that to help ourselves. Because for us, it's more than academic. It's very personal. And so this talk that I'm going to give is around our own life experiences and how we're navigating this venomous atmosphere of hate. So I'll start with understanding radicalization and hate as I understand it. And then we'll move on to how this radicalization in some cases actually gets escalates to genocide and has psychological effects. And then we go back to, why we started as a group and our experience of hate and how we came together. And then our own journey in understanding and dissecting and unpacking this hate and how that informed our activism and what we do now and how you can help, right? So let's start with the first one. So around 2014, I think just before that, WhatsApp came, and around 2018 or thereabouts, when the second election, when Modi's second term was coming. So I had been a member of a lot of my groups where I had a lot of childhood friends. And suddenly, before the election in 2019, there was a change in the tone of a lot of people that I knew for a very long time. And I think that's where the slippery slope began, the one that Prof. Barton was referring to. And there was a lot of content that was being pushed through WhatsApp and Facebook, and arguably through government actors to have a very a very clear aim that would hopefully give them some political dividends. And that hate, as people started learning and relating to in some ways, just because of the sheer volume of it, there's suddenly normalization of those hate narratives, right? And everyone, when there's normalization, then you have upvotes and likes, and this again is no different. If you were to go back to the Holocaust era, it has the same pattern. You start with a slippery slope, and then people validate it, normalize it. And then once it's normalized, then suddenly you are the victim, right? And you have an aggressor out there who's a threat to you, who is violence inclined, and you need to deal with. And so that threat construction happened next. And, being a part of the minority, I was able to feel that very well. And these are people that were friends with me forever, right? I mean, since my childhood. And then once that threat construction is done, now that particular person, whichever community he belongs to, maybe a Jew or a Muslim, is suddenly not human anymore. He is the other, right? He's stereotyped, he's portrayed in a very threatening way as a monster, and that allows you to go on to the next thing, which is group radicalization. So it's okay now, because he's not human anymore, to not really have your moral compass in the way you deal with him or her, right? And then now there's this competition between various group members on, who's more radical, who does, the baddest thing, because you're not dealing with a human anymore. You're dealing with a monster, right? So that's radicalization. And this is something I could see in the past 5 years, right? And what happens then is even more interesting. So this is a different stages of genocide by a gentleman called Greg Stanton. And what we talked about right now is the first four things, right? So classification, where you identify someone as the other and you symbolize them. For instance, within in India, the prime minister once made this famous statement that you can actually identify these people by the clothes they wear. They could have a beard, they could have a cap. So that's symbolization. And once you've done that, these people who wear those clothes are subhuman, because you see, they are threatening peace. They're coming after you. And so that goes on to the next thing of organization. So that's very close to what we talked about. So the group radicalization occurs in organization, and that we saw happen from 2019. And then you polarize, right? Now you organize, you polarize. See, you're either with us or you're with them. And once you polarize, then things become easier. So around the Delhi election, there's all of this thing about Gadaron ko goli maro in Hindi, which is they're traitors, shoot them, and you see, if you don't, I'm sorry, you're a traitor yourself. And so that's a polarization. And then you have these slogans that prepare people, and then you have extermination, and then denial. So I'll actually go through, these have happened in recent times. We were not going back all the way to in the Holocaust. And these narratives are happening right here in Australia. And so what that does to people in terms of psychological effects is people feel unwelcome and unsafe in the community, right? And if you feel unsafe, you're going to feel, there's going to be decreasing feelings of safety and security, psychological distress and lower self-esteem. So you don't know why that's happening to you. And then you're depressed, anxious, and you have other things like post-traumatic disorder. Now, going on to our story. So these are the generic things. Our story, just going on from that, psychological effects. When we started the group, this is how most of us felt. So when I say us, most of us have an Indian background, and we are very fiercely proud of a multicultural ethos, you see. So you have in our group, and so you have Hindus, you have Muslims, you have Buddhists, and you have Hindu Tamils and Muslim Tamils, and so on and so forth. So if you were to take a train from southern India to the north, all you have to do is sit in the train and you'll find so many different languages, so many different dresses. So we have been a people who have been very fiercely proud of a multicultural ethos. But around this 2019 or 18 time, the hate narrative, the volume of it was just humongous, right? And that made people extremely scared, depressed. And some of us used to go online and say, hey, that's wrong. And they used to they used to get trolled with venom. And so almost every person who's in our group felt exactly like this guy feels. And so we formed our group, the Humanism Project, and we said, we will do this. So we will stop the hate and divisiveness and reclaim who we were, our diversity and inclusiveness. This was around early 2020. And since 2020, we had further understanding into hate. So, it's been a turbulent year since 2020 to 2021. You had the Delhi pogrom in early 2020. Then you had COVID jihad, where the Muslims were blamed for spreading the coronavirus disease. Then you have the Dalits, who are a part of the Indian community, who there's a woman who was raped, and then you had anti-Sikh violence. And what is common to all of these was this, right? It starts with classification. So with the Delhi pogrom, the Muslims were the other, they were traitors, they had to be shot, right? And symbolization, they wear a certain kind of clothes, right? And dehumanization. So once you do that, it is okay to shoot them. And since then, believe it or not, we've had webinars in Australia right here who have gone on to deny that there was a pogrom, right? The COVID jihad was another one where people, the Muslims, as you can see, there you see symbolization right there. You have a man. So this particular figure came in a very prominent Indian media house magazine. So you see a Muslim man wearing the skull cap, and there it says 60% of the cases have been spread by Muslims. This thing, symbolization again, resulted in people being shunned from their businesses. The businesses were they were excommunicated. And then there was one really, really poignant story of a woman who was pregnant, goes into a hospital, is not admitted in the hospital, and she actually dies. Heartbreaking stories. Hathras was another one where the Dalit community underwent the same, symbolization, othering, and dehumanization. This was a case where a woman was brutally raped, and in the end, the victim was blamed and there was total denial. Same thing with the anti-Sikh violence here in Australia that happened recently. The Sikhs were all of a sudden called terrorists who were traitors to India, and so on and so forth. And there was violence right here in Sydney, and these things go on till today. The hate narrative occurs here, right here in Australia, till today. So what we are doing is, as activists, what we're trying to do is raise awareness, saying that, and we're working with various human rights organizations and interfaith dialogue, saying that, well, this is happening, and this is not good for us. It does not, align with our ethos of multiculturalism, Australian multiculturalism, and cohesiveness. And we're trying to collect data around what's going on. So you see, and they're working with legal and policy experts. One of our speakers here, Rita Jabri, has done a lot of work in that, and we're working with other policy experts. And using this data, which is the evidence, we go on to politicians and say, hey, we have data on how it affects people and breaks people, breaks societies, impacts on our social cohesion, and pretty much undermines who we are as Australians and our Australian values. And that is a conversation that we are having. And we also work with global people through global partnerships in the US, UK, Europe. And all the time we go around in circles, learning lessons, fine-tuning our messaging, fine-tuning our data collection, speaking to politicians. So that's really our advocacy at a high level. And what are we asking them? So the first ask to them is this, it's really easy to stop hate. And how do you do that? You stop funding it. You see, a lot of these organizations which have known connections to extremist organizations overseas are, believe it or not, here in Australia being funded through federal and state funding, right? So there's a complete lack of awareness of what these organizations are and what they represent. And that's sad because, in the era of COVID, you really could put that money to better use. You see what I'm saying? So stop funding, as easy as that. And then what's our second ask? A second ask is this. Most of your current interventions require there to be an imminent threat. Someone has to be preparing. There's got to be an imminent threat. And the problem with that is all of these up to stage 5, you have that hate thing creep into the society and divide it, and you're really not doing anything. So it affects social cohesion in a big way. So our ask is stop, intervene when dehumanization happens, right? Because social cohesion means a lot to us as Australians. And, we have to find ways of, looking at the data and saying, it's not a lone pedestrian hate, but there's a lot of data to say there are groups here which use dehumanizing narratives. And all you have to do is knock the door and say, I'm keeping an eye on you. As simple as that. And so those are our two asks. And why are we doing this? Because the UN Special Rapporteur said that social media hate speech, acknowledged that it contributes directly to hate crimes against minorities, and call for this poisoning of minds online to be acknowledged and confronted. And we know, as we saw earlier, that this dehumanization, psychological research has shown that prejudice, stereotyping, and dehumanization just breaks people, right? It's got long-lasting adverse effects on the targets. And, so it's not something we can take lightly. And more importantly, though, I think we owe a better world to our children, right? So how can you help? Get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you and see, how we can collaborate with each other, because we very passionately feel that this is something that we need to address now and here. Thank you.